So I'm just going to take charge here, so I think we'll do the PR now. Sitting to my right, my immediate right, is a young gentleman, and here's Dean Wilson. Welcome. You want us? We were just getting started. Italian. Do you want to do the opener? And I'll follow up.
Well, first of all, delighted to see our colleague, Ms. Youngster, here again. He's come back to the school. We had a wonderful conversation, I guess it was about a year ago, with and he was good enough to provide this book, which I urge you all to go out and buy multiple copies of. But I really am surrounded in this room now with great students and great professors, and also really with a public relations pantheon, if I can use that term, of greatness. Of course, we have a legend, Harold Burson, who is here, who really invented this field. I mean, he really invented the modern field of public relations, which is remarkable. I'm also proud to say that we have another legend, Ron Rogers, who's sitting here at the table. Ron has recently agreed to be the vice chair of the board of counselors of our school, and has a tremendous record here in town and nationally, and has done wonderful things as head of the Rogers Group. We were a little bit late today coming down to this, in part because we're having a big event next Wednesday, and we were scheming a little bit on how to make that even more of a public relations success. And then, last but certainly not least, I want to introduce the gentleman to my immediate right, most of you know, who has really been a remarkable visionary in insisting on the highest quality, the highest professional standards, as well as the highest academic standards for the field of public relations. And he has led a team here that is also in the room today. I see two of them here, most of you know. Jen is here, and Jay. Wave, Jay. This is a wonderful team here at the Annenberg School for Communication that has really flourished under the leadership of Jerry. Let me just rattle off a couple of statistics. We have just recruited the largest class of public relations students ever in the history of the school, up to 86 students. The program started in 1998 with how many students? 5 students. So that's not a bad increase. That's not a bad increase. Our undergraduate public relations program is thriving, indicated by the fact that 3 of the 7 winners of PRWeek's undergraduate PR Student of the Year have been our alumni. So this is national recognition. The Strategic Communication and PR Center is right now fielding the 6th iteration of what we call the GAP study, Generally Accepted Practices. So when my colleagues and I go to China, we go to all over the world, and people say, well, what about that GAP study? And who's that guy who does that GAP study thing? And how come we're, even more importantly, we were in the Gulf recently, and they said, how come we're not included in that study? You know, we want to be included in that study as well.
So would you say write a large check?
Yeah, that's my job. But without, so I did, for those of you who are students especially, you really are in the presence of 3 giants in this field. And the Annenberg School for Communication is really privileged to be able to have them with us today. And I know that Burson is going to share his vision and wisdom with you. So now
Thank you, Dean. Thanks very much. It's great to be with you all today, and I just want to recognize Ron Rogers and all the great things he's done for the school, which would take a lot of time to list. But something a lot of people don't know about Ron is that he's a cowman, he's a rancher. You look at him, you see him all gussied up like that. He would really much prefer to be in a blue, open shirt with his jeans on and his cowboy boots out on the range, am I right?
or was on
So, and as for this young gentleman sitting right here to my right, I've been in the field myself 38 years, 40 years counting grad school. And Harold has been a legend and mentor to the entire profession for that entire time. Like when I was an undergraduate, people spoke in awe of Harold Burson. PRWeek named him the century's most influential PR figure, and I assume they were speaking of the 20th century. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if come time to pick the most influential person of the 21st century, that Harold will also win that accolade too. His impact on the profession is just no way to overstate it. In 1953, he and Bill Marsteller founded the firm Burson-Marsteller, which under his leadership has grown to become the largest PR firm in the world. With how many offices, Harold? Like several thousand offices?
No. Not really right. 55.
55 offices, pretty much every corner of the globe. I think probably 4 offices in China alone, I think, and growing fast there. He's won every award, PR Society's Gold Anvil Award, Arthur W. Page Society's Hall of Fame Award. If there were a Pulitzer Prize for PR, Harold would undoubtedly be the first recipient, which I guess would be some recompense for his not having won a Pulitzer, for his coverage of the Nuremberg trials as an Army news correspondent for the Armed Forces Network, something we were just talking about. This is a guy with a really interesting history. And let's not forget that Harold is also a Trojan dad. Sitting over there to our right is Harold's son, Mark. Mark is a dual degree holder from USC Annenberg, Master's in PR, BA in journalism, actively engaged in the management of the firm. Welcome, Mark. Good to see you again. But I've got to say, speaking personally, for all of Harold's accomplishments, the one that impresses me the most is that in a business where people tend to come and go, where flipping from one agency to another is very, very common practice, where folks are often picked off by their clients to move in-house, and where today's rising star is tomorrow's victim of a few soft fiscal quarters, Harold has been a steady, constant, positive, and always current force in his own firm, on the profession, and on the people who have had the pleasure and the honor of working with him through these many years. That kind of steadfast loyalty to his people, to his clients, and to his field is an all too rare attribute that every one of you budding professionals out there should aspire to emulate. It's really very, very special. And thank you so much, Harold, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. Harold Burson.
You know, the reason I think probably that I've been in the same job since 1946, basically, is no one else ever offered me another one. But 2 weeks ago, I was invited to attend the opening of a new journalism school at my alma mater, which is the University of Mississippi at Oxford, Mississippi. And I was in front of a group composed of people your age. And I started remembering, you know, how I would have felt back in 1940 if someone of my vintage had come up and started talking to me and fellow students. And I figured out in my mind that in the juxtaposition of someone then talking with as many years behind them as I, that person would have to have graduated in 1870. Literally, this coming June is my 70th year since graduation, although it put a little asterisk after that because I was 19 when I graduated. So I'm not as old as you think I am. I'd like to talk just about 2 or 3 subjects for just a few minutes and then get down to what you want to know and talk about, and then I'll be responsive to questions. The first thing I want to talk about is the current status, public relations and communications, both in the corporate world and in the nonprofit world, including government. this recession that we are in the midst of right now is by far the most serious recession in my business career. And I am old enough to remember the Great Depression. It is not nearly of the magnitude of what happened to this country in the 1930s, but as recessions go, this has been a very deep recession. It's affected literally millions of people, many large businesses, and it's very global. As far as public relations is concerned, it has not had the adverse impact on public relations as previous recessions have had. Previously, one of the first things that happened when the country was about to go into recession is our clients would substantially reduce, or even in some cases eliminate, their budgets with firms such as ours. They would cut off 30, 40, 50% of their people in their own internal public relations departments. And that did not happen this time. Speaking for Burson-Marsteller, we're down about 7% year to year. And last year was the best year that Burson-Marsteller has had in its 55-year-old history. And the same, our clients had some layoffs, but really very minor compared to what would have happened in previous recessions. And I'm accepting the financial services business, the real estate firms, and the automobile industry. Those firms have really gone through the ringer. But the general economy otherwise. But what has happened is, and this has happened in our firm largely, is the hiring stopped about a year ago, and still the hiring is very limited and really confined mainly to when we need a specialist that we don't have on our staff, we will hire that specialist. But as far as adding people, one example, we have an intern program at Burson-Marsteller, and we normally have about 50 people in it in 3 or 4 offices. This year we had about 25 people. We usually offer about 30% or a third of the people jobs. To qualify for our intern program, you have to be between your junior and your senior year. And we don't do this for altruistic purposes. We do it as a hiring device. It's really a safe hiring device, because when you have somebody around for 8 weeks actually working with real life situations, you know what you're getting when you hire these people. This year, we made 1 job offer. And one of the reasons is we had made about 10 last year, and we did not cancel any of those. Those people came on board. Those were the only people who did come on board. And why did this happen? Why was public relations? Why did the people survive? And one reason is I think that at no time in my career has the importance of public relations, communications, been as great insofar as the people who are managing large institutions, and even smaller institutions, as it is today. Public relations, communications have the greatest status, I think, in my 60 years or so that I've been practicing public relations. To the point that public relations people work so closely now with CEOs of companies that very frequently, when the CEO changes, there's a public relations guy or a woman looking for a job when he leaves. And this is true even when the transitions are very calm and internal and everything. The closeness with which they work today is such that a new CEO comes in and the old CEO is tagged as, he's Joe's boy, I want my own, or Joe's woman who does this stuff. And only a few years ago, the most institutionalized job in the whole executive hierarchy was a public relations guy who had been hired from a local newspaper and has been there 35 years and knows everything, knows where everybody is buried. That sort of is out the window now. The second thing, let me just comment. I feel very sorry for the people who graduated from communication schools in 2009. They've had a really hard time of it. I would hope that it's a little bit better 2010. Very candidly, I can't be really too optimistic about it. I think this recession is going to continue for a while. I think that hiring is going to be postponed for a while. I think that those of you who are ready to graduate, start looking now, because it's going to be a hard time, I think, when you get out. Next thing I want to talk about is what really is the internet and how does it relate to what we in public relations communications do. I've actually had sessions like this where the question came, Mr. Burson, do you think that the internet's going to replace public relations? And to me, it's a sort of a nonsensical kind of a question, because they're just two different things. The internet, regardless of how powerful it is still one of a continuum of news disseminating vehicles that started with the printing press, or even before that, the alphabet, the printing press, and then escalated to radio, television, movies, cable television, and now we have the internet. I can remember back in the early 50s, which is the time when Burson-Marsteller was just getting underway, that most of us who had been in public relations had been former news people on either magazines, newspapers, or press associations. And we were extremely perplexed. We knew that this new medium, television, was very powerful, but we didn't know anything about it. And the people in television really didn't know how to use us or what we could do for them. And we took a good 6, 8, 10 years before we really adapted ourselves to be able to take advantage of television. I think a lot of that's going on now. The impact of, one other thing I would say this to you, no advance in communications dissemination has replaced any of the previous methods of dissemination. When TV first came on, everybody predicted the immediate demise of motion picture theaters, and also the demise of radio. Of course, none of that happened. I think that the internet will have more effect on newspapers, for example, than probably on any of the other media, magazines, as well, general magazines. It's interesting that every year there are more magazine titles, and usually those titles are very narrowly focused. Left-handed golf players, for example. And one of the reasons for that is that the economics of publishing today are such that you can make money if you have a print run of 10,000 or so, 15,000. Whereas before, it took 100,000, 200,000 to be economical. But I think the internet is still a work in progress. We really don't know what the really good things it can do. We don't know all the bad things it can do. We know that it's a tremendous invader of privacy. And I think there's going to be legislation that's going to restrict a lot of the shared information that goes on. You know, most people don't realize that once you put something on television, it never goes away. It's traceable. I think that's a question of public policy that is going to have to be resolved in some way, because it is so invasive in our lives. On the other hand, it's actually, I think, the most powerful of the media that has come along. It's interactive, it's two-way, it's instantaneous, and one of the reasons it's so popular, it's so cheap. You can get millions of messages out at no cost particularly. Whereas you can form world groups of people in a matter of days or weeks, whereas before, if you did that, it would take you months or even years and thousands or even millions of dollars in postage and printing to reach the mass audiences that can reach instantaneously with the speed of light. It's the only news dissemination, information dissemination vehicle which, when married with a credit card, can facilitate a transaction involving hundreds, thousands, of millions of dollars. None of the others could do that. So it's a very, very powerful medium, and there's a big turf war going on between firms like ours in public relations, the advertising agencies, literally thousands of small boutiques headed by nerds who really know a lot about the internet. And the fight is, who is going to be the vendor and the purveyor, or the middle person between those who want messages disseminated and those who actually prepare those messages. So with that, I would like to conclude and invite your questions and talk about things you want to talk about and hear about.
So you said that, you know, hiring is happening because of specializations, and then we talk about no one really knows the internet. Is internet still a specialized area for public relations?
Oh, very much so.
Or is it
very much so.
Something everyone should do?
No, it's a very specialized area, and I would say that it is to some substantial degree generational. You know, if you're more than 30 years old or 35 years old, you shouldn't take that person to a presentation to present about the internet. You know, me talking about the internet in front of a client would be just very aberrational. I have no credibility whatsoever.
What skills do you prize in a young public relations practitioner? You talked about your intern program. Are there specific skills you look for, or is there an it factor or a combination?
You know, I'm sort of a product of my own past, and I still believe that the basic skill to be a good public relations communications person is an ability to write. I think writing is the most important qualification that a person can have. And unfortunately, as time goes on, there are fewer and fewer and fewer really good writers. When we hire a good writer, that person gets billable immediately because there's not much competition. And I think that institutions like this would well serve their students by concentrating on writing. And the problem with that today is that it's expensive to teach writing if you do it the right way. The writing instruction is not very productive unless it is critiqued. And that takes time, and it takes a person who is a good writer. And it doesn't help a lot if you get a class of 24, 30 people and you have 2 or 3 graduate assistants who don't know very much more about writing than the student does. So I think it's a very big challenge to institutions like this on writing. The other thing that I regard as a major skill is something my father used to term as being in the know. And being in the know is being able to have someone present a subject to you that you don't know much about, but you do know enough about it that you can talk intelligently for about 2 minutes. And you don't ask any dumb questions, and you say after the 2 minutes, this is pretty interesting things, and a lot of things are going on. Let me get back to you on Monday. And then of course, it's easy to get back to him on Monday with a lot of information because all you have to do is go to Google. But in my day, you had to go to the library. So it was much tougher getting information. So now you can be an expert. But and there's only one way that you can be in on the know, and that is to read, to do a lot of reading. And I won't embarrass you by asking us for a show of hands on how many of you read a daily newspaper this morning. But I have, once a month in New York, I have a breakfast for the new people who've come to Burson-Marsteller, and I usually get 6 to 8 of them. And I say, how many of you read a paper? And there'll be one hand up. On a good day, it'll be 2. And I found out that both times it was a giveaway that they got at the subway station. But I feel that people if you want to be in our field, you have got to do a lot of reading if you really want to get ahead in the business. And that means, read a good daily newspaper, read good magazines, books, things like that. So reading, I think, is one of the keys to writing. People who don't read a lot usually don't write very well.
Just to follow up on that, what Harold was talking about, we emphasized in our classes constantly the importance of being insatiably curious.
Yeah.
That's being in the know.
Yeah.
Insatiable curiosity, just knowing what's going on in the world. More questions?
You were one of the first agencies to get, one of the very few to go into Asia. You understood the potential of Asia for the business. And you worked for a lot of clients like Union Carbide when it happened in India and things like that. So what have the challenges been when you try to manage business, international business?
Well, that's a good question and very pertinent as far as I personally am concerned and as far as Burson-Marsteller is concerned. I believe that the most defining moment, the defining decision in the history of Burson-Marsteller was in 1959 when we decided that we were going to go overseas. And what started that was the Treaty of Rome, which established the European Common Market. We were a very small firm. We had not yet done $1 million in revenue. And our 2 largest clients began talking about building a factory in one of the 6 of the original European Common Market countries. And I started getting interested in going over there with them to serve. And actually, when it ended up, they paid about 20% of our total cost when we went to Geneva. It took me a long time to figure this out, but I've always said that if I had to make that decision today from a pure business standpoint, it was a no-brainer. I wouldn't have done it. Because we were not very well financed, and I knew it was going to take a year, year and a half probably to break even. And still, I wanted to do it. And I had two things in my background that made me interested in going to Europe. The first one was, of course, that I spent 2 years in Europe during and after the war. And, you know, I knew that Europe was going to prosper for a long time, just rebuilding parts of it. Second thing is that my parents came to this country from England. And although I grew up down south, I did not grow up in a typical southern household. My father was fairly well read, and he talked about Europe a lot. And so I had that kind of an exposure that most American kids would not have had. When we went to Europe, actually it was part of a plan to be a global company. I can show you a document that was written in the 1959, which pretty well describes the Burson-Marsteller of today. We had a timetable that we were going to Asia, Latin America, Australia, and we pretty much lived up to that timetable. The one thing that it did for us, the reason I say it was the most defining decision that we've ever made, is that we were, you know, as I say, we probably in the rankings would not have made the first 50 at that time. There was only one other agency that had an overseas office, and that was Hill & Knowlton, and they went to Europe the year before we did. And immediately that we went over there, we became the other international agency. And I have to confess to you that we did a very good job of publicizing that. And I look at some of those clippings and I read some of those speeches that I made in 1961, 2, 3, 4, and I start blushing. You know, it was a case of, you know, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And, you know, basically Europe, you know, and international trade was so new back then, you know, you could make up all the stories that you want to and people would believe you. But that's when we really started growing, is when after we went to Europe. And by the way, the second largest contingent of Burson-Marsteller people is in India today. We have about 300 people in India. And the third largest is China, where we have about 200. For years and years, the second largest was always the UK. It's now number 4.
The question, sir, is there a way, I mean, you did something that on the short-term view, it sounds like from your description was foolish. You weren't making $1 million yet. You were a new firm. And you said, I know, let's go to Europe. And since Hill & Knowlton was the only other firm over there, this was clearly a kind of cutting edge decision. And I wonder if you could reflect a moment on whether or not that is something innate that you're born with, that sense of knowing context and direction and paying attention to the big strategic, or is there something that schools like the Annenberg School can do to better prepare their students to have the kind of vision and take the sort of risks that you took?
I have a a fairly simplistic theory. And that theory is that people above a certain socioeconomic level get opportunities to make transformational changes in their lives for the better, sometimes for the worse, and don't recognize that that's a moment of opportunity. And if they recognize it, they don't really know what to do about it. So I think that whatever I have done has been my ability to recognize opportunities and know what to do about those opportunities. And that, I think if you look at almost any person who's had any kind of success in his or her life, you find out that they go through that process. Something happens at one time in their career, and it changes or propels them much faster than they would before. And another that I would say, I have been very fortunate in my life in having a series of mentors who took an interest in me and really taught me a great deal. And again, that's another trait I think you'll find in most successful people. There's someone in that person's life who meant a great deal to them. So that, you know, I don't know whether you can teach people that or not, but because I think a lot of it is instinctive.
I have a question. Just drawing on the benefit of your decades of experience, one of the core of public relations, I think, is a profound understanding of human nature and what motivates people. We talked about all the technological changes that have changed the way we do our business or execute our strategies, but have you seen any evolution in human nature in the 60 years that you've been in business, and how are people different today and how to reach them?
I think people are products of their environment to a very great extent. I think my son's generation, which is a boomer generation, would do things that I don't think I would do, because, you know, I grew up during the Depression. That's made a great had a great influence on me. So I think that the newer generation, your generation, who is experiencing this downturn, is going to be more conservative in the decisions that you make than your predecessor generations were. So I think that that you're, to a large extent, a product of the environment in which you grew up in. You brought up something that when you first started your comment. I think one of the big problems that public relations faces is that there is no really commonly accepted definition of public relations. I suspect if I gave each of you a piece of paper and asked you to write a definition of public relations, if there are 60 people in this room, I'd get 60 different answers to it. And my feeling about it is that we should come together and come up with some kind of better definition than we have now. My definition of public relations is that it's an applied social science whose purpose and use is to influence behavior in such a way as to motivate people, groups, or individuals to a specific course of action. It's not a matter of just getting the information out. It's for the purpose of promoting or encouraging a specific course of action. And the material that we deal with is public opinion. And our E equal MC squared is that one can create an opinion where there is none, one can change an opinion or hope to change an opinion, and one can reinforce an existing opinion. And everything we do falls within those three.
Do you think that a more commonly used accreditation for public relations would help that common understanding of what it is?
I think it would, but I think it would be extremely difficult to do. It would be extremely difficult to finance. You know, back about 40 years ago, Edward Albanese, who was really one of the great pioneers in public relations, was very strong on licensing those who, on the agency side, the public relations practitioners who sell their services. At the time, I was against it on the basis that, you know, who wants government in their business? I think probably it would have been a very good idea. But again, public relations is not a really big industry from a financial standpoint, and just the licensing process, if done by government, would be so costly. There's just not enough people to pay for the process. But I think that, you know, anybody can declare himself or herself a public relations specialist, and I think there's no measure.
What is your opinion of PR as a practice being labeled as corporate communications, or you know, the shift and shying away from using PR as a name because of negative connotation, because of spin and so forth. And then you know, many people, they don't, you know, say they want to use corporate communications or.
This has been one of my pet subjects for years and years. I think the worst thing that ever happened to public relations was when communications started being used as a descriptor for public relations. And it came about during after the Nixon administration, and it came about as a result of Watergate. And the way that happened is that when the tapes got released, there were numerous instances where Nixon is quoted as saying to his associates, "We're going to have to PR that one," or "Let's call in the PR flacks," things like that. And so the public relations as a descriptor developed a pejorative connotation. And the corporations, large companies, responded by changing their public relations titles to communications titles. And communications, to me, is one part of public relations, and it does not really acknowledge what should be our influence, our effort in influencing policy decisions and providing input for policy decisions.
We'll take one more question.
Okay, thank you. BM ended the business with General Motors 2 years after joining YMR. Do you think there would be a GM bankruptcy if you would have been with them all the time? As in terms of how much influence?
Probably earlier. No, you know, I think the story of the American automobile industry is a story of, you know, failed management. It was a result of too much protectionism for too long. I think decisions were made for financial reasons more than they should have been at the expense of long-term, which is, I think, one of the common problems in business today. I think business is being managed on too short-term a basis for immediate profits. We're not reinvesting in research and development the way we should be. And there's a big emphasis is always now, corporations are measured more on what their profitability is than on any of the other attributes that a corporation should be fulfilling.
Perhaps on that note of the importance of research and education and development, we could just a round of applause for our guest. And I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may, to present you with a signed lithograph of Tommy Trojan. But notice he's carrying a pen which is lighter than the sword. So I can think of no more appropriate person to receive this gift than you, sir.
Well, I have a narcissistic wall in our office in New York, and this will go on that wall.
Maybe we can just get a shot.
Okay.
Thank you.
The Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist Paul Conrad.
Right, that's Paul Conrad. And I'd also like to give to our special alumni for coming back and coming back to the Trojan family. And thanks so much, Ken. This is for you as well. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to seeing you at the next forum.